This is Greg Orloff with IIoT World, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Aaron Semley today. And Aaron's the CTO of HiByte. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you. Great to be here, Greg.
Well, maybe if we get started here for a little bit for folks that may not be familiar with you folks, tell us a little bit about HiByte and what you folks do.
Yeah, so we're founded in 2018, so been around a little bit, based in Portland, Maine. So if you've never been to Maine, come visit, get a lobster. It's a great spot.
I'll take you up on
Uh,
that.
yeah. And really focused on industrial data ops, which I think we'll get into. But the founding team, Tony's the CEO, Tori heads marketing, and John heads product. They're all from Kepware, PTC. They've all been in industry. I was originally from Kepware back in out of school in 2008, which feels like forever ago. And then PTC as well. So we've all been in industry a long time. And I'm not one of the founders, but joined pretty early. And we all knew, coming from Kepware, PTC, the kind of industrial landscape, what was there, and kind of still thought there were challenges around connecting, industrial data into cloud systems, and didn't feel like Kepware at the time, or even PTC with ThingWorx, had fully solved those. And that brings us to where we are today.
Got it. Well, maybe in the whole odyssey of digital transformation, because it is an ever-evolving topic, maybe clarify for everyone too, what is industrial data ops and why is this such a critical opponent of digital transformation?
Yeah, so industrial data ops is an IT term, so it's probably been around, a decade. It's still fairly new in IT, but it's the concept of moving data between IT systems and how you do that at scale. Uh, the benefit in IT systems is data is fully contextualized usually, right? There's a nice schema information. It's
Right.
fully defined. So industrial data ops is trying to apply the data ops ideas into industrial, which is a unique environment. Uh, at scale, what it looks like, in my opinion, is if you have a industrial player that's got, say, 50 sites, you have a team of maybe half a dozen people that
Mhm.
have the technology and the tooling to quickly enable what we call use cases, which could be anything. For OEE is a classic example that people understand, but I think it goes much beyond that. We can get into it, but quickly enable those use cases across sites, even if those sites are producing the same part but very different. So how do you get to that state, which is difficult today? So rapidly develop use cases and kind of iterate over that. Um, and one of the key challenges is contextualization, which I kind of hinted at. And a lot of people that
Okay.
aren't in OT don't understand that problem. So to kind of back that up and present that in a way that people might understand, uh, you have a smart thermostat, Greg, most likely in your house, or
Sure, sure.
yeah, so like I got one too, right? So let's say we both have smart thermostats and those are connected to the internet. We plug them in and they're going to shoot their temperature reading. They're in our living rooms and it's going to shoot the
Right.
temperature reading up to the cloud and we're going to log in to go see the temperature in our house. Well, imagine if you log in and it just says thermostat one and thermostat two, and then there's a number, right? And you're like, okay, well, there's only two of us. We could probably
Is that
talk.
yours or
And
mine, right?
yeah, like which one? What's the
Okay.
temperature at your house? You said you're in Cleveland, so I'm in Maine. Temperatures are probably similar, but we could figure it out. But there's no context there. Like, what's the unit of measure? Whose house is it in? Where's it coming from? Uh, Obviously, that's not how Nest thermostats and those things work, right? You plug them in and you
Right.
log in. It's fully contextualized and it's aware. The challenge in industrial is they're like that first case. There's no context, right? So you walk into a factory, there's an injection molding machine that was installed even, let's say, 10 years ago. Back then, when the person was controlling the PLC or programming the PLC, they were really just thinking about how do I get the data off of this machine into this little local HMI panel here so that an operator can see what's going on.
Right.
They were not thinking about how do I make this piece of equipment globally identifiable across my enterprise with contextualized data that by the time it gets to the cloud, let's say, it's like that second case where, oh no, that's Greg's thermostat in his house and he's in the US, so it's in Fahrenheit. And that's one of the big challenges in industrial is just we've never had that data strategy external really to the factory walls.
Yeah, and it's one thing, we could probably figure out whose thermostat's what, but when you're dealing with tens, hundreds, thousands, or 10,000s of those things out there, right, in an industrial complex, it becomes exponentially more critical
Becomes
to know which one is
overwhelming. Yeah,
right.
yeah. Those two thermostats become like 100,000 readings, and like you're logged in at home looking at it, going, "Where do I even start? Like, how do I put any intelligence around this information?"
Got it.
Yeah.
So is that type of contextualization, is that done better at the edge in the cloud? How do you break that down? Because there's always conversations around where do you do things? I know fog's another term. I mean, so what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think our best customers are ones that have tried to do it in the cloud and have struggled. So I think, even if you go back to like 2014, 10 years ago or so, that's kind of what we were doing. We were just taking the raw data that was there, sending it over some protocol, MQTT with a tag name, thermostat one, thermostat two, landing it in the cloud. Uh, and the challenge is, like you said, you get that list of 10,000, you're trying to figure it out. Maybe you have a single site and you were able to do it, right? You had someone that was able to piece it together, but then you go to the next site and it's all different and you've got to do it again. And that becomes really costly. And then the site changes, something changes, and now you got to adapt. So in my opinion, it's best to do it like as close to the edge as you can. I think if you were to look, into the future, that injection molding machine, that equipment would be plugged in fully contextualized from the get-go, right? And that's where that information would all be. And it would present itself as fully contextualized data like the Nest thermostat example. That's not where we are today. There's technical business reasons. I think in the future we will be, but I think that North Star of, okay, get it as close to the data source as you can, the context, that's where you want it. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is it's closest to the people that understand what that thing is, like your
Right.
tribal knowledge around it, right? So you might as well leverage that. And the second piece is if you move it down to that layer, you can reuse it upstream, right? So if I want to send that information to cloud service XYZ and those services support contextualization, well, because I have it contextualized at the edge, I can just move that up to those services that support it. Versus if you do it in the cloud, that becomes a central point for everything else that needs the context, which can become a bottleneck. And then people usually don't do this, but if you switch cloud vendors or you did something like that, you just
Right.
created a ton of work for yourself to go replicate that somewhere else.
Got it. Well, you brought up an interesting point. I want to peel an onion a little bit back a little further on in terms of the tribal knowledge piece of this. There's always this, the issue of IT departments and OT departments, who's handling the stuff on the shop floor versus the stuff in the office side of it. What's Highbytes doing in terms of the intelligence hub to manage or even bridge that gap or dissonance if it exists in an organization?
Yeah, it exists less than it did 10 years ago. I think we're getting better, but it's still there. There's
Yeah.
still an IT OT divide. And I think uh, one of the interesting things we see is still to this day, you'll see IT organizations push IT tooling down to try to solve this data ops problem. So they'll say, we have MuleSoft that we're using for data ops and IT. Let's go and use that. Or we're going to push Kafka down, or we're going to push Databricks. And what you'll see is it'll get inside the walls of the factory, and the OT folks are looking at it and don't know what to make of it because it looks nothing like the stuff they're familiar with. And then also it'll lack capabilities that are key to OT, like the ability to contextualize data is pretty limited. Even the ability to connect to things like OPC sources is not native. So you end up trying to do a bunch of work to get that tooling in, and OT eventually pushes back, and the success for the adoption rate is pretty slow. The other thing you'll see is OT kind of lead the charge if it's kind of an OT strong org, and they'll take a SCADA platform or some other tooling, and they'll try to go upstream and drive that into IT.
Vice
And it's a
versa, right?
similar problem the other direction. They'll look at it and they're like, what is this thing? We have capabilities that are similar to this, so there's overlap. We don't want to adopt this. What's the security footprint of this? It doesn't plug into like Splunk or Datadog, for example, or other HashiCorp or other things that we need in IT to scale this thing and manage it. So they'll get pushed back, and that'll get limited adoption. So in our opinion, the sweet spot, you need to like meet the requirements of both camps with a tool. So what our approach is, that if you logged into the Highbyte Intelligence Hub interface and you looked at it, an OT person could get in there, look at it, and quickly see a lot of features that they're familiar with in an OT environment. I can browse an OPC UA namespace. I can drag and drop things, kind of like HMI capabilities. So they're familiar with it. But on the other side of it, the actual technology, it hooks well in, or it hooks into like existing IT infrastructure. So you can deploy it with Kubernetes and Docker. You can monitor the log files at scale with Splunk and other tooling. So you kind of have to meet both worlds to have success. Otherwise, it'll die off at some point. Yeah.
Got it. Understood. Well, if you can, I mean, you must have run across several, fantastic use cases. Anything you can share with us that you've seen in clients that may resonate with our global audience?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So one of my favorite questions from folks, it's and it's customers, it's investors, you name it. It's like, what are the repeatable use cases? Like what are the ones that rinse, wash, and repeat? And it's not a simple answer, but my answer is like all the repeatable ones have been done, right? Like OEE, for example, you can do it in data ops if you want to move that to data ops because you want to use the same infrastructure. I think that makes complete sense. But OEE is not new. It's not
Sure.
revolutionary. There's value there. But the repeatable stuff has kind of been done. What's more interesting with data ops is once you have the infrastructure in place, what you'll see is culturally OT gets empowered as they're kind of walking through the factory floor and they'll see issues and correlations. They get empowered to say, hey, I think I see a correlation between X, Y, and Z in downtime. If we could collect some data on this and run it to service X to monitor it, maybe there's something there. And with a data to ops infrastructure, you can quickly test that, right, with limited investment, like in weeks. Then if that actually does prove to have some ROI, you can adopt that and scale it across your enterprise. So what you end up seeing is like use cases that are really niche to the
Ah,
environment. So, but one that it's a little less niche that I think is relatable to folks that I find funny. This is even one I can talk to my kids about, and they think it's funny. We've all seen Roombas or had Roombas, right? The little house vacuum robots,
mine's
and
probably going to kick on in about 2 minutes. So.
right, right, and we all know that although they've gotten better, they get stuck occasionally, right? They'll get stuck under a kitchen chair in a corner, right?
Right.
So we have customers that have AGVs, which are autonomous guided vehicles, which are essentially forklifts, uh, not vacuuming the floor, but they're moving around the factory, moving stuff.
Sure.
And like your Roomba, right? They suffer from the same challenge. Every once in a while, they'll get stuck in a corner. So this was a challenge one large customer had. They had 40 something facilities. They had three different AGV vendors across those facilities, so it wasn't the same vendor. And they wanted to solve this use case. So they started with one facility. They used HiByte in this case or data ops, and they created a data model that said, okay, what information do we need from this AGV to detect if it's stuck? So you could imagine it's things like, when's the last time it moved? Is it currently in operation? That data set kind of like that.
Sure. Yeah.
So they hand that to OT. They connect to that particular vendor's AGV, either like over Modbus or REST or whatever that one was. Um, Funnel that data up into their cloud service where they just have a little app that's monitoring that to try to detect, when is this AGV should be in motion, hasn't moved for a period of time. And when they detect that, they send a notification back down into the factory SCADA that like notifies the OT that, hey, this Roomba's stuck and they got to go to the corner and like kick the thing out. These are pretty big machines, so I don't know exactly how they do that. I assume
Hey, Roomba's stuck. You can't go pick it up and put it back in the charger.
right. I assume you can drive it a little bit, or I don't know that part. But that's an example of a use case that drives real ROI because that's downtime, right? If those AGVs are
Sure.
stuck. And the beauty of it is they were able to solve it in one facility, take that data model, publish it out to all the other facilities and say, hey, with your AGVs, just provide OT, your infrastructure, just provide this data up into the service and we'll provide this capability down to the factory. And they were able to do that really quick. And now they have it up and running across, all 40 something sites.
Wow. That's impressive, though. I mean, it takes something to replicate it like that across the organization. That's a powerful story.
Yeah. Yeah. We often say, so like legacy history was like connect system X and Y, right? Connect your
Mhm.
ERP with your MES. And it was a 6 month to year long to even longer project to do that integration. And then once you got it, people start to give you feedback on like different how you want to change the integration. So it's constantly in motion, right? So we, as an industry, we'd spend a ton of money connecting system X to system Y, and then we'd have to change it. It becomes really expensive. The concept of data ops, in my opinion, what you're trying to do is drive the cost of that change to near zero because as soon as you set up this use case and get the feedback loop from the factory and start to get people involved, you're going to want different data. You're going to want to scan at different rates. You're going to want to continually innovate on the use case. So things are going to change. How do you drive, in terms of your data ops infrastructure, your process, how do you drive the cost of that change towards near zero so that you can iterate rapidly and drive the ROI? So I think that's the challenge of the modern day.
Hmm. Interesting. It's going to be fascinating to watch these things evolve like this over time, too.
Yeah.
So speaking of evolution, I know you guys have got a new version of this. I think Intelligence Hub 4.0 is coming out here shortly. Am I correct on that?
It is. Yeah, we're wrapping up the bits next week in terms of R&D, and then I think it ships the next week after. So we've been at it for 8 months now. Probably the biggest rewrite we've done so far. Some big features in there, obviously, from what we've learned. So
Yeah, share with
data,
us what some of the you can look forward to in the next release.
yeah. So data modeling, that's the contextualization piece of the
Mhm.
platform, which we think is really important as a differentiator. So we've done a ton of enhancements there to make it really much easier to develop. I'll say slightly more complex models as we see people evolve. You see models with hierarchy and you see models that are composition. So it's trying to provide the right level of capability without trying to model the world. We also don't believe you should be use case driven and not trying to model everything, but a lot of innovation there to make that easier, faster, easier to replicate. The concept of unified namespace, which has been around and created a lot of buzz, trying to make it easier to kind of what you see is what you get. So we call it our namespace part of the product where you can actually build out like ISA 95 hierarchy or how you logically think about the factory and then plug in the stuff you've modeled, your equipment or machines into that hierarchy just to make it easy. I mean, ideally, like I said, the equipment itself would produce the contextualized data that's,
Okay.
where it is, what it is, but that's not there today. So this is kind of a layer to make that easier. Um, Pipelines, which is our kind of ETL transformation tool. We've done a ton of work there. The UX is awesome on that in the new feature, and we support like replay, so you can track and troubleshoot data flows, see what's going on. And then we also added an ignition connector to Inductive Automation's ignition platform.
Ah,
For
okay.
folks familiar with that, ignition supports the concepts of UDTs, user-defined types. Those are data models. So SCADA's been doing data modeling for 20 years, but they kind of
Right.
do it for themselves, right? To build screens rapidly with the same equipment. But we find that if customers have already spent the time doing data modeling down in Ignition, we want to make it really easy to get that data contextualization out and get it into other platforms up into the cloud, whatever, whether it's Snowflake or Sitewise or whatever other system. So be able to leverage that IP they built out.
No, it makes sense. You don't want to reinvent the wheel every time you're swapping or adding another layer.
Exactly. Yep.
No, fantastic. I appreciate the time today. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for sharing some of the use cases and the new release data and taking some time to have a conversation. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Always happy to chat. Yeah. Take care.